My fiancé wanted me to quit my job to be a stay-at-home wife, so I added one line to the prenup that changed everything. Garrett presented it like a romantic gesture. "I want to take care of you," he said, sliding the thick legal document across our kitchen table. "You won't need to work anymore once we're married." I'd been a software engineer for 6 years, working my way up at a tech startup. My salary was actually higher than his, though he conveniently forgot that detail whenever he talked about providing for us. The prenup was 47 pages long. Garrett's lawyer had crafted it to protect his family's real estate empire, while leaving me with virtually nothing if we divorced. I'd get a small monthly allowance as long as I remained a devoted wife and homemaker. "This seems one-sided," I said, flipping through the clauses. "That's how prenups work," Garrett replied. "My family's wealth needs protection." What he didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for months. The way he'd started criticizing my career obsession, how he'd conveniently schedule romantic dinners during my important work presentations, the passive-aggressive comments about women who put ambition before family. I took the prenup to my own lawyer, a brilliant woman named Hadley, who specialized in protecting women's assets. "This is medieval," she said after reviewing it. "He's essentially asking you to sign away your financial independence." "Can we add a clause?" I asked. Hadley smiled. "What did you have in mind?" 2 weeks later, I returned the modified prenup to Garrett. He barely glanced at the changes, too focused on the wedding planning and guest list for his family's political connections. "Perfect," he said, signing with a flourish. "My parents will be so relieved." The added clause was buried on page 34, written in the same dense legal language as everything else. In the event that either party requests the other to cease professional employment, the requesting party agrees to provide financial compensation equal to the projected lifetime earnings of the affected career, calculated at current market rates with annual increases adjusted for inflation and industry growth. My projected lifetime earnings as a software engineer? $3.2 million. We married in October. The reception was everything Garrett's mother had dreamed of: 200 guests, ice sculptures, and enough flowers to stock a funeral home. 3 months later, Garrett started the pressure campaign. "Darling, it's time to submit your resignation," he announced over breakfast. "My mother's expecting grandchildren soon, and my career is really taking off." I smiled sweetly. "Of course. I'll need the check first, though." "What check?" I pulled out my copy of the prenup, highlighted section on page 34. His face went through several emotions as he read. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You can't be serious." "Your family's lawyer wrote it," I said. "You signed it." Garrett called his father immediately. Within hours, their legal team was reviewing the document. The clause was ironclad. Garrett's signature made it legally binding. "We could fight this in court," their lawyer admitted during an emergency family meeting, "but it would be expensive, public, and unlikely to succeed." Garrett's mother nearly fainted when she learned the amount. $3 million? She gasped. "For what?" "For her projected lifetime earnings," the lawyer explained. "It's actually quite reasonable based on industry standards." Garrett tried everything. Guilt trips about family expectations, threats about our marriage not working out, bribes involving vacation homes and jewelry. I remained unmoved. "You wanted me to quit," I said. "The price is right there in black and white." 6 months later, I was promoted to senior engineer with a substantial raise. Garrett stopped mentioning my resignation. His family's dinner conversations shifted to other topics. Last week, his cousin's wife asked how I managed to keep working after marriage. "Simple," I said, raising my wine glass. I read the fine print. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sometimes the best protection is buried in plain sight. But that wasn't the end of the story. The real war began 2 months later when I discovered I was pregnant. I'd suspected for weeks. The exhaustion, the morning sickness that felt more like all-day nausea. When the test showed 2 pink lines, I stared at it for 10 minutes, my mind racing through implications. Garrett was ecstatic when I told him that evening. "This is perfect timing," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt more possessive than loving. "Now you have the perfect reason to stay home." "We haven't discussed that," I said carefully. His smile faltered. "What's to discuss? You're having a baby. My baby. Our family needs you at home. And our family needs my income. Not anymore." I got the promotion. He'd been waiting to spring this on me. VP of Development. Base salary of $200,000 plus bonuses. I did the math quickly. Still less than my current compensation package. But he was right. We could survive on his income alone. "That's wonderful news," I said. "Congratulations." "So you'll quit?" I kissed his cheek. "For $3.2 million. His face went dark. "You're pregnant with my child and you're still playing these games?" "I'm protecting our child's future," I replied. That money could fund their entire college education. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. Garrett's mother started sending articles about the importance of maternal bonding. His father scheduled a lunch to discuss family priorities. Even Garrett's sister, who'd been a successful marketing executive before her own pregnancy, called to share how fulfilling motherhood was. "I never realized what I was missing," she said during our coffee date. "Work feels so trivial now compared to raising the next generation. How's the company doing without you?" I asked. Her smile tightened. "They're managing." "And your stock options? The ones that were supposed to vest next year?" "Some things are more important than money." I nodded sympathetically, but I'd done my research. The company had been acquired 6 months after she left. Her unvested stock options would have been worth $1.4 million. At my 12-week appointment, Dr. Martinez delivered perfect news. The baby was healthy and developing normally. Garrett squeezed my hand as we looked at the ultrasound screen. "When will you need to stop working?" he asked the doctor. "That varies by individual and profession," Dr. Martinez replied. Many women work until they deliver. Since you're in tech, you could likely work from home indefinitely if needed. Garrett's grip on my hand tightened uncomfortably. That night, he tried a new approach. I've been thinking, he said over dinner. What if we compromise? You could freelance from home after the baby comes. Part-time consulting work. Freelancing doesn't offer health insurance or retirement benefits, I pointed out. Plus, it would be impossible to match my current earnings potential. Money isn't everything, says the man whose family made their fortune through strategic financial planning. He set down his fork. Why are you being so stubborn about this? Why are you being so controlling? We stared at each other across the table, the question hanging between us like a challenge. The breaking point came at his family's monthly dinner. I was 19 weeks pregnant, just starting to show, when his aunt brought up a funny story about her neighbor. She worked throughout both pregnancies, the aunt said with a laugh. Poor kids spent more time with nannies than their own mother. The eldest is in therapy now. How sad, Garrett's mother added pointedly. Children need their mothers, especially in those crucial early years. I smiled politely and excused myself to the bathroom. When I returned, I heard Garrett's voice from the kitchen. She's being completely unreasonable. I've tried everything. Sometimes women need to be guided toward the right decision, his father's voice responded. Your grandfather knew how to handle these situations. What do you mean? Make the choice for her. Create circumstances where staying home becomes the only viable option. My blood went cold. I can't just fire her, Garrett said. Of course not. But there are other ways. Her company depends on several contracts, doesn't it? Contracts that could become complicated. I pressed myself against the wall, recording every word on my phone. Dad, I don't know. Son, sometimes leadership requires difficult decisions. Your wife is prioritizing her ego over your family's well-being. That's not acceptable. The next morning, I called Hadley. They're planning to sabotage my career, I explained, playing the recording. Hadley listened in silence, then swore under her breath. This is conspiracy and possibly extortion, she said, but proving it would be challenging. Do you have evidence of any actual interference? Not yet, but I want to be prepared. Smart. I'll draft some protective documents. In the meantime, document everything. For the next month, I watched and waited. Garrett's behavior shifted subtly. He became more attentive, more supportive of my work. He stopped mentioning resignation entirely. Too subtle, too convenient. The first sign came when our biggest client, Henderson Corp., requested an emergency meeting about project restructuring. I'd managed their account for 3 years without a single complaint. We're concerned about consistency moving forward, their CEO explained during the video call. Given your upcoming situation, my pregnancy doesn't affect my work quality, I replied professionally. Of course not, but we understand things can become unpredictable. We're exploring options that might be more stable. After the call, I immediately checked our client database. Henderson Corp's primary holding company was owned by a subsidiary of Garrett's father's investment firm. That evening, I said nothing to Garrett about the meeting. Instead, I watched him carefully during dinner. How was work today? He asked, cutting his steak with precise movements. Productive. The Henderson project is moving along smoothly. His hand paused for just a fraction of a second. Good to hear. The second incident happened a week later. Our startup's largest investor requested a review of all current projects, specifically questioning the viability of our long-term contracts. We need assurance that key personnel will be available for the duration of these commitments, the investor stated during the board meeting. I sat quietly as my boss fumbled through explanations about maternity leave policies and project management continuity. After the meeting, I pulled up the investor's corporate structure. 3 degrees of separation led back to Garrett's family's investment portfolio. That night, I lay awake next to my husband, my hand resting on my growing belly, wondering how many other traps were being laid. The answer came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, my boss called an emergency meeting. I'm sorry, he said, his face genuinely distressed. We're losing 3 major contracts. The board is demanding budget cuts. You're firing me. It's not performance-based. Your work is impeccable. But with the pregnancy and the revenue loss, when do these contract cancellations take effect? He checked his notes. Henderson pulls out next month. Meridian Industries ends their agreement in 6 weeks. And Blackstone Development is requesting a project review that could lead to termination. All 3 companies had connections to Garrett's family network. I understand, I said calmly. When's my last day? End of the month. We're offering a generous severance package. That evening, Garrett came home with flowers and champagne. I heard about work, he said, his face arranged in sympathetic lines. I'm so sorry, darling, but maybe this is a blessing in disguise. How so? Now you can focus on the baby. No more stress about deadlines or difficult clients. I accepted his hug while my mind calculated timing and evidence. You're right, I said softly. This might be exactly what we need. His relief was palpable. The next morning, I called Hadley. They did it, I said. I can prove the connections between the companies and his family's investment interests. That's tortious interference with contract and possibly conspiracy, she said. But the real question is what you want to do about it. I want to file for divorce. Silence stretched across the line. Are you certain? With the baby coming? Especially with the baby coming? I won't raise a child with a man who destroys my career to control me. All right. But there's a problem. The prenup includes a morality clause that could complicate things. I'd forgotten about that buried provision on page 23. Either party could be held responsible for actions that brought public shame or financial harm to the family. His actions caused me to lose my job, I pointed out. True. But he could argue you're abandoning the marriage during pregnancy, which might trigger the clause. So I'm trapped. Not necessarily. There's another option. Hadley's plan was audacious. Instead of filing for divorce immediately, we would force Garrett to request my resignation formally, creating legal documentation of his interference. Then, when he inevitably refused to pay the $3.2 million compensation, I could file for breach of contract and divorce simultaneously, using his financial manipulation as grounds. It's risky, she warned. If he calls your bluff and actually writes the check, you'd have to decide whether to stay married to a man who bought your silence. He won't write the check, I said with certainty. His ego won't allow it. The trap was set. That weekend, I initiated the conversation over breakfast. I've been thinking about the job situation, I said, buttering my toast with deliberate casualness. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is the perfect time to focus on family. Garrett's face lit up. Really? I'd like to submit my resignation letter this week. Make it official. That's wonderful news. He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. My parents will be thrilled. Of course. I'll need you to make the request formally, for my records. His smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? The prenup requires written documentation if either party requests career termination. Just a formality. I could see him weighing options, the convenience of having me quit versus the legal implications of putting his request in writing. Convenience 1. That Tuesday, Garrett presented me with a typed letter on his personal letterhead. I, Garrett Holbrook, formally request that my wife cease her professional employment to focus on family responsibilities and the care of our expected child. This request is made in the best interest of our family unit and our child's welfare. He'd signed it with a flourish, probably thinking he was finally getting what he wanted. I smiled sweetly and tucked the letter into my purse. I'll submit my resignation tomorrow. But I didn't submit any resignation. Instead, I took the letter straight to Hadley. Perfect, she said, making copies. Now we wait for him to ask about the compensation. The wait was shorter than expected. Thursday morning, Garrett brought coffee to my bedside, an unusual gesture that immediately put me on alert. Darling, I've been thinking about our financial planning, he began carefully. With the baby coming and your transition to homemaker, we should probably restructure our accounts. What kind of restructuring? Joint accounts, shared budgeting, that sort of thing? More traditional family management. And the compensation payment? His hand stilled on the coffee mug handle. What compensation payment? I sat up in bed, pulling the covers around my growing belly. The $3.2 million for my lifetime earnings. It's outlined in page 34 of our prenup. That was just legal language. Standard prenup terminology. You signed it, Garrett. Your letter requesting my resignation triggers the compensation clause. His face cycled through confusion, anger, and calculation. Nobody actually expects those provisions to be enforced, he said finally. I do. Be reasonable. That's an enormous amount of money. It's exactly equal to what I would have earned over my career. The career you asked me to abandon. For our family. Then our family can afford to compensate me for the sacrifice. That evening, Garrett called an emergency family meeting. I sat quietly while he explained the situation to his parents and their lawyer. This is extortion, his mother declared. It's a legal contract, I replied calmly. Your family's lawyer wrote the terms. The lawyer, a distinguished man in his 70s, reviewed the prenup with obvious discomfort. The clause is legally binding, he admitted reluctantly. It was included at Mr. Holbrook Sr.'s insistence to prevent any future claims of coercion regarding career decisions. The irony was delicious. But surely no reasonable person would enforce such an extreme provision, Garrett's father argued. Your son made the request in writing, I said, producing the letter. The enforcement isn't up to me. It's automatic per the contract terms. What followed was 2 hours of threats, bribes, and emotional manipulation. They offered jewelry, cars, vacation homes, everything except what the contract actually specified. Finally, Garrett's father played his trump card. If you pursue this, I'll make sure you never work in tech again. My influence extends throughout the industry. Like you already did with my previous job? The silence was deafening. I have recordings of your conversation about sabotaging my career, I continued, along with documented evidence of the connections between Henderson Corp., Meridian Industries, and your investment portfolio. The lawyer's face had gone pale. Those could constitute criminal conspiracy charges, he said quietly. Garrett's father leaned back in his chair, reassessing the situation. What do you want? He asked bluntly. I want the $3.2 million compensation, as specified in the contract your family lawyer wrote and your son signed. And if we pay it, then I'll honor the contract and become a stay-at-home wife. And if we don't, I smiled. Then I'll file for divorce, citing financial manipulation and conspiracy, seek full custody based on your demonstrated willingness to undermine our family's financial stability, and pursue criminal charges for interfering with my employment. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. After what felt like an eternity, Garrett's father nodded curtly. We'll need time to liquidate assets. Of course. I understand these things take time. 30 days. Perfect. As we prepared to leave, Garrett grabbed my arm in the hallway. How long have you been planning this? He asked, his voice barely controlled. Since the moment you slid that prenup across our kitchen table. You manipulated me. I protected myself. There's a difference. The next month was the strangest of my life. Garrett and I maintained the facade of a normal marriage, while lawyers and accountants worked behind the scenes to structure the payment. He tried periodically to convince me to accept alternative arrangements, trust funds, real estate investments. anything except liquid cash that would give me true financial independence. I declined every offer. During my monthly OB appointment, Dr. Martinez noticed my elevated stress levels. Everything okay at home? She asked gently. Just some financial planning discussions, I replied. Money stress can affect pregnancy outcomes. Have you considered counseling? I almost laughed. What kind of counseling addresses a situation where your husband's family orchestrated your job loss to control your life choices? We're working through it, I said instead. The payment came through on a Tuesday morning in late March. I was 28 weeks pregnant, my belly round and prominent, when Hadley called to confirm the wire transfer. It's done, she said. $3.2 million minus taxes is now in your personal account. I hung up and placed my hand on my stomach, feeling the baby's strong kicks. We did it, I whispered. That evening, Garrett arrived home with a bottle of sparkling cider and a forced smile. So, he said, popping the cork, ready to start your new life as a lady of leisure? I accepted the glass but didn't drink. Actually, I've decided to continue working. His smile froze. What? I'm starting my own consulting firm. With the compensation money as seed capital, I can build something substantial. But you agreed. I agreed to quit my job if you paid the compensation. You paid. I quit. The prenup doesn't specify what I can do afterward. Garrett set down his glass with deliberate control. You're telling me I paid $3.2 million for nothing. You paid $3.2 million to learn that I'm not for sale. You can't be serious. Dead serious. I've already signed lease papers for office space. 3 other senior engineers are joining me. We start next month. The fury in his eyes was frightening, but I felt oddly calm. My father warned me about women like you, he said quietly. What kind of women? The kind who pretend to love you while planning to destroy you. I stood up, my hand resting on my belly. Garrett, I did love you, but love doesn't mean accepting manipulation and control. You made your choice when you decided to sabotage my career. I was protecting our family. You were protecting your ego. He started toward me, then stopped himself. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. I walked upstairs and began packing. The divorce papers were filed the next morning. Hadley had spent weeks preparing the documentation, evidence of the conspiracy to interfere with my employment, recordings of family meetings discussing manipulation strategies, and financial records proving the connections between canceled contracts and Garrett's family investments. Garrett's response was swift and vicious. He filed counterclaims alleging fraud, emotional manipulation, and abandonment. His family hired the most expensive legal team in the state. The custody battle was brutal. They argued I was an unfit mother who prioritized money over family stability. They presented evidence of my scheming and deceptive behavior regarding the prenup. They brought in psychological experts who testified about the trauma of maternal separation. I countered with evidence of their systematic campaign to destroy my financial independence. Phone recordings of conspiracy discussions. Financial records proving deliberate interference with my employment. Documentation of their attempts to isolate and control me. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd practiced family law for 30 years, listened to 6 weeks of testimony before delivering her ruling. This case represents one of the most calculated attempts at financial coercion I've encountered in 3 decades on the bench, she said. The defendant's family engaged in systematic efforts to undermine the plaintiff's career and financial independence through deception and manipulation. She awarded me full custody, with supervised visitation for Garrett, until he completed anger management counseling. Furthermore, she continued, the prenuptial agreement's compensation clause will remain enforceable, as it represents the only protection available to the plaintiff against the defendant's proven willingness to interfere with her career. Garrett's family appealed, of course. The case dragged through higher courts for another 18 months, while I built my consulting firm and raised my daughter alone. Elena was born in May, a healthy, beautiful baby with Garrett's dark hair and what I hoped were my stubborn genes. Garrett was allowed brief supervised visits, during which he alternated between desperate attempts to reconcile and cold threats about future legal action. The appeals court ultimately upheld the custody ruling and added language strengthening the prenup's enforceability. Garrett's pattern of financial manipulation, they ruled, created compelling state interest in protecting my right to economic independence. By Elena's first birthday, my consulting firm was thriving. We'd landed contracts with several major tech companies. Ironically, some of the same firms that had refused to work with my previous employer after Garrett's family's intervention. The tech industry, it turned out, didn't appreciate manipulation and conspiracy any more than I did. Garrett remarried 2 years later, a woman 15 years younger who worked as a receptionist at his father's firm. She quit her job 3 months after their wedding. I sent them a card congratulating them on their traditional family arrangement. Last month, at Elena's 5th birthday party, she asked why Daddy didn't live with us. Daddy and I have different ideas about how families should work, I explained. He thinks mommies should stay home and take care of children all day. I think mommies can take care of children and have careers too. Which way is right? She asked, chocolate cake smeared on her cheek. Both ways can be right, depending on what the family wants. But the most important thing is that everyone gets to choose for themselves. She nodded solemnly, then ran off to play with her friends. That evening, as I tucked her into bed, Elena looked up at me with serious brown eyes. Mommy, when I grow up, can I be a consultant like you? You can be anything you want to be, I said, kissing her forehead, as long as you always read the fine print. Today, my consulting firm employs 47 people. We specialize in helping companies navigate complex contractual relationships and avoid the kind of systematic manipulation that destroyed my first career. I still get periodic legal threats from Garrett's family. They've challenged the prenup's enforceability 3 more times, unsuccessfully. The compensation money, invested wisely, has grown to over $5 million, more than enough to fund Elena's education and secure her future independence. Hadley recently retired, but not before helping me establish a legal foundation that provides free contract review services for women in professional relationships. We call it the Fine Print Project. The irony isn't lost on me. Garrett's attempt to control me through financial manipulation ultimately created both my independence and a tool to help other women avoid similar traps. Elena is now 8 and shows alarming aptitude for both mathematics and contract law. Last week, she negotiated a complex trade agreement with her classmate involving lunch money, Pokemon cards, and playground privileges. When I asked where she learned such sophisticated negotiation tactics, she grinned. "I read the fine print on my allowance contract," she said. "Did you know you promised to pay me extra for A grades, but there's no penalty for B grades? That's a loophole." Sometimes the best protection really is buried in plain sight. And sometimes the best revenge is teaching the next generation to read more carefully than their parents ever did. My grandmother left her fortune to the grandchild who loves me most, so my cousins decided to eliminate the competition. I should have known something was catastrophically wrong when Marcus texted our family group chat at 2 a.m. "Emergency family meeting tomorrow. Grandma Rose wants to see everyone immediately." The message felt different, urgent, desperate, dripping with the kind of barely controlled panic that comes when serious generational wealth is suddenly at stake. Marcus never texted the family unless he wanted something expensive from someone, and he definitely never called emergency family meetings unless there was major inheritance money involved in the discussion. For context, my grandmother Rose was worth exactly $47 million. Real estate empire spanning 3 different states with prime commercial properties, stock portfolio that made seasoned financial advisors weep with pure envy, jewelry collection that could legitimately fund a small developing country's entire national budget, and diversified business investments that generated more passive income, while she slept peacefully than most hardworking people earned during entire calendar years of labor. She'd single-handedly raised 6 traumatized grandchildren after our parents died in various tragic accidents. Multiple car crashes, aggressive cancers, drug overdoses that the family always pretended were accidental to preserve our social standing. The usual cursed family luck that seemed to follow our bloodline like a malevolent supernatural spirit, systematically picking us off one by one until only Rose remained standing strong and defiant. We'd always made uncomfortable dark jokes about inheritance during increasingly awkward family dinners, creating morbid gallows humor about who'd receive what specific valuable assets, when Rose finally kicked the bucket and joined our long-dead parents in whatever afterlife awaited us. But Rose had this absolutely terrifying way of looking directly into your soul that made your spine tingle violently, and your carefully constructed lies shrivel up and die painfully in your throat before you could speak them aloud. Like she possessed supernatural ability to see straight through your elaborate bullshit facade to the actual person you really were underneath all the desperate pretending and carefully maintained social masks. She'd survived the brutal Great Depression by eating literal garbage scraps from restaurant dumpsters and sleeping in freezing abandoned buildings during harsh winters, built an impossible business empire from absolutely nothing but raw determination and absolutely ruthless intelligence, and maintained zero tolerance for weakness, pathetic excuses, self-pity, or anything that remotely resembled whining about life being inherently unfair. Rose had started with nothing but a borrowed $20 and unshakable determination during the worst economic collapse in American history. While other families lost everything to bank failures and foreclosures, she somehow managed to buy distressed properties for pennies on the dollar. By the time the economy recovered, she owned half the commercial real estate in 3 major cities. Her business philosophy was simple but brutal. Trust no one completely, verify everything twice, and always have 3 backup plans for when people inevitably disappoint you. That ominous morning, we gathered solemnly in her intimidating Victorian mansion's formal parlor like guilty suspects lined up in a classic Agatha Christie murder mystery, waiting for the detective's final revelation. The hand-polished mahogany furniture gleamed menacingly under expensive imported crystal chandeliers, and multiple generations of stern family portraits stared down at us with cold, disapproving dead eyes that seemed to judge our corrupt souls and find us wanting. The room itself was a testament to Rose's success. Persian rugs worth more than most people's houses, first edition books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves, and artwork that belonged in museums but somehow ended up decorating her private sanctuary. Marcus, 28, the insufferable golden boy who'd graduated Harvard Business School summa cum laude, and never let anyone forget his academic superiority for even 5 consecutive minutes of conversation. He worked at a prestigious investment firm where he specialized in hostile corporate takeovers, essentially destroying companies for profit while wearing expensive suits and pretending it was for the greater good of capitalism. Sarah, 26, the predatory shark lawyer who specialized in hostile corporate acquisitions and calculated legal destruction, and had never voluntarily visited Rose unless she desperately needed emergency money for her expensive cocaine habit or mounting gambling debts from underground high-stakes poker games where she regularly lost thousands of dollars to criminals who didn't accept credit cards. Twin brothers Jake and Luke, 24, who'd already completely blown through their substantial 6-figure trust funds on luxury sports cars, designer drugs, and month-long Las Vegas weekends that cost more than most people's annual salaries. They were identical in appearance but completely different in personality. Jake was the aggressive one who solved problems with violence and intimidation, while Luke was the manipulative one who preferred psychological warfare and emotional manipulation. Both had dropped out of college multiple times and showed no signs of developing any marketable skills or work ethic. My sister Emma, 22, the genuinely sweet and innocent one who actually called Grandma Rose every single Sunday just to chat warmly about her week and ask detailed questions about Rose's prize-winning garden. Emma was studying to become a pediatric nurse, volunteering at children's hospitals during her free time, and somehow managing to remain optimistic despite growing up in our catastrophically dysfunctional family. She was the only one among us who seemed to have inherited Rose's genuine compassion instead of just her ruthless business instinct. And me, 25, the designated family black sheep who'd been taking comprehensive care of Rose since her devastating stroke last year, when everyone else claimed they were too busy with their allegedly important lives to help. I dropped out of law school to become Rose's full-time caregiver, managing her medications, driving her to doctor appointments, and listening to her stories about building her empire from nothing. Everyone assumed I was doing it for inheritance money, but the truth was simpler. Rose was the only family member who'd ever treated me like a human being instead of a disappointment. Rose sat regally in her motorized wheelchair, eyes sharp and calculating as freshly broken glass, despite the constant oxygen tank that had become her unwelcome companion after the stroke damaged her lung function. Her longtime lawyer, Mr. R. Peterson, stood professionally beside her with official-looking legal documents that made everyone shift nervously in their expensive antique chairs. Peterson had been Rose's legal counsel for over 30 years, and was one of the few people she trusted completely, mainly because she paid him enough to ensure his absolute loyalty and discretion. "I'm dying," she announced matter-of-factly, like casually discussing tomorrow's weather forecast or fluctuating stock market prices. 6 months maximum, maybe significantly less if these expensive doctors are correct about the aggressive cancer spreading rapidly through my organs. So I'm completely changing my will today, and I wanted you all to know immediately. The elegantly appointed room went absolutely dead silent. You could literally hear hearts stopping mid-beat, breath catching painfully in throats, mental calculators frantically computing complex inheritance divisions and potential windfall amounts. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds of pure, concentrated greed mixed with barely concealed panic. Instead of splitting everything equally among you like you've been confidently expecting your entire privileged lives, I'm leaving my complete $47 million fortune to whichever grandchild demonstrates they love me most genuinely. She smiled that absolutely terrifying, predatory smile that had made ruthless business rivals surrender entire companies without firing a single legal shot. You have until Christmas Day, exactly 3 months from today, to prove your devotion conclusively. The announcement hit the room like a financial nuclear bomb. Marcus's face went through several color changes, from pale shock to red anger to calculating determination. Sarah immediately started taking notes on her legal pad, probably already planning her strategy to contest the will or manipulate the competition. The twins just stared at each other with identical expressions of confusion and growing panic. They'd been counting on their inheritance to fund their lifestyle indefinitely. Marcus leaned forward eagerly, already calculating potential angles like the Harvard-trained corporate shark he'd become. "How exactly do we prove love, Grandma? What are the specific measurable criteria for evaluation?" "Actions, not empty words. I'll be watching everything you do, everything you say, everything you think I can't see or hear." Her piercing eyes swept across us like prison searchlights hunting for escaped convicts. "The person who truly loves me will reveal themselves naturally through consistent behavior." Emma looked genuinely distressed. Not about the money, but about Rose's deteriorating health. "Grandma, are you sure about this? Maybe we should just focus on spending time together instead of competing." Rose's expression softened slightly when she looked at Emma. "Sweet child, this isn't about competition. It's about truth, about seeing who people really are when money is involved." After she was carefully wheeled away for her mandatory afternoon nap by her private duty nurse, we huddled together in the massive commercial-grade kitchen like guilty conspirators planning a revolution. The entire emotional energy had shifted completely from awkward family reunion to something much darker, more dangerous, and infinitely more desperate. The kitchen itself was larger than most people's entire apartments, with professional-grade appliances and enough counter space to cater a wedding. "This is absolutely insane," Sarah muttered frantically, pacing back and forth like a caged predator. "We should contest it immediately through probate court. Get her declared mentally incompetent due to medication effects." "On what legal grounds?" Marcus asked with calculated coolness. "She's mentally sharp as ever, probably significantly sharper than any of us combined. Peterson will testify to her competency, and she just demonstrated perfect awareness of her situation." Emma looked genuinely worried, her naturally pale face becoming ghostly white. "Maybe she just wants to see us more frequently before she, passes away. Maybe this inheritance competition isn't really about money at all." "Wake up and smell reality, Emma," Jake interrupted harshly, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is about exactly $47 million in liquid assets. The game just changed completely, and there's only going to be one ultimate winner standing." Luke nodded in agreement with his twin. "We can't afford to be sentimental about this. $47 million divided by 6 is still life-changing money. But $47 million for one person? That's generational wealth." That's when I noticed the meaningful look that passed silently between Marcus and Sarah. Something cold, calculating, and absolutely terrifying. Like they were already mentally planning something that would make the rest of us very unhappy, very quickly. I'd seen that look before during family arguments. It usually preceded someone getting emotionally destroyed or financially ruined. Sarah stopped pacing and pulled out her phone. I need to make some calls. Research the legal precedents for this kind of will structure. And I need to review Grandma's financial portfolios, Marcus added. Understand exactly what we're competing for. Over the next few days, the family dynamics shifted dramatically. Everyone started visiting Rose with suspicious frequency, bringing gifts and offering help with increasingly desperate enthusiasm. The mansion, which had been quiet and peaceful during my year of caregiving, suddenly became a busy hub of fake affection and transparent manipulation. Marcus showed up every morning with expensive flowers, always roses, obviously, and insisted on helping with Rose's financial paperwork. He'd spend hours in her study, supposedly organizing her investments while actually photographing every document when he thought no one was looking. His Harvard business training made him confident he could optimize Rose's portfolio better than her current financial advisors, and he wasn't shy about sharing his opinions. Sarah arrived each afternoon with legal documents, claiming they were routine updates to protect Rose's assets from potential government seizure or tax complications. She'd spread papers across Rose's dining room table and explain complex legal concepts in a condescending tone, as if Rose hadn't been navigating business law successfully for 60 years. What Sarah didn't realize was that Rose had been recording every conversation, building her own case file of everyone's true motivations. The twins developed a sudden fascination with Rose's war stories and business empire founding history, recording everything on their expensive smartphones with professional quality audio apps. They'd sit for hours listening to Rose describe her early struggles during the Depression, asking detailed questions about her strategies and methods. What they were really doing was creating content they could sell to documentary filmmakers or biographers after Rose died, monetizing her life story for their own benefit. But Emma stopped coming to visit altogether after the first week. When I asked why during our weekly coffee date at her favorite downtown cafe, she showed me the horrifying photographs with trembling hands. Someone had been systematically following her everywhere she went. Professional quality surveillance pictures of her at work, at the grocery store, getting out of her car, walking her rescued dog around the neighborhood park, all with precise timestamps, all recent, all clearly meant to terrify her into staying completely away from Rose and the inheritance competition. I'm genuinely scared, she admitted, hands shaking violently as she showed me image after disturbing image. I think they're absolutely serious about physically hurting me if I don't back off permanently. The photos were professionally taken with expensive equipment, showing Emma from multiple angles and distances. Whoever had taken them had been following her for weeks, learning her routine and documenting her vulnerabilities. There were pictures of her apartment building, her workplace, even the inside of her favorite coffee shop. Someone had been studying her like a target. 2 weeks later, Emma called me at 3 a.m., sobbing hysterically into the phone. "Someone broke into my apartment tonight," she whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably with pure terror. "They didn't take anything valuable like electronics or jewelry, but they left something behind that's much worse." "What kind of something?" I asked urgently, already grabbing my car keys and jacket. "A note. A professionally typed note that says, 'Stop visiting Grandma Rose immediately, or things will get much worse for you.'" My stomach dropped like I'd swallowed molten lead. I drove straight to her apartment complex through empty streets and found her waiting terrified in the brightly lit lobby, too scared to go back upstairs alone to her violated sanctuary. The note was typed perfectly on plain white paper with no identifying marks, completely untraceable, with no fingerprints or DNA evidence visible. The break-in had been professional. No forced entry, no damage to the locks, no signs of violence or ransacking. Someone with lockpicking skills had entered quietly, left their message, and disappeared without disturbing anything else. It was a precision intimidation operation designed to terrify Emma without leaving evidence that could be traced back to the perpetrators. That night, I secretly installed multiple hidden security cameras around Rose's entire property without telling anyone in the family. What I captured over the next week made my blood run completely cold with horror. The high-definition footage showed Marcus and Sarah meeting secretly in Rose's moonlit garden at exactly midnight, thinking everyone was safely asleep. I enhanced the audio quality using sophisticated software I'd learned about online and heard every single word of their chilling conversation. "Emma's still clearly the obvious favorite," Sarah was saying, cigarette smoke curling around her words like poison. "Rose's whole face lights up like Christmas morning whenever someone even mentions Emma's name. She's definitely the biggest threat to our chances. Then we need to eliminate her from the competition permanently," Marcus replied, with the emotional warmth of a corporate restructuring announcement. "Remove her from the equation entirely." "What exactly are you suggesting here?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "An accident. Something believable that won't point back to us legally. You're an experienced lawyer. You know exactly how to make problems disappear completely without leaving any evidence trail." My hands were literally shaking violently as I watched my own blood cousins coldly planning to hurt innocent Emma. But their evil conversation got exponentially worse from there. "What about the designated black sheep?" Sarah asked, meaning me specifically. "He's been taking care of her daily, doing all the medical grunt work and earning sympathy points. Rose still sees him as the family disappointment who never amounted to anything meaningful. We just need to make sure he stays that way in her mind permanently." Marcus pulled out a folder filled with documents. "I've been researching his background. Law school dropout, no steady employment history, history of depression and anxiety. We can paint him as unstable and manipulative." Sarah nodded approvingly. "And I've been documenting every conversation I've had with Rose about him. She's mentioned feeling sorry for him, feeling obligated to help him. We can use that to show he's taking advantage of her sympathy." They spent another hour planning their psychological warfare campaign against Emma and me, discussing specific lies they would tell Rose, evidence they would manufacture, and ways to make us look like greedy manipulators while positioning themselves as Rose's protectors. That's when I finally understood the complete bigger picture. Emma's apartment break-in, the professionally typed threatening note, the systematic surveillance photographs. They were strategically removing anyone who threatened their inheritance chances, using psychological fear and physical intimidation as calculated weapons. The next morning, I called Emma immediately and told her everything I'd discovered. "We have to go to the police immediately," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard in weeks. "With what concrete evidence? A recorded conversation about inheritance money? They haven't actually committed any prosecutable crimes yet being the absolutely terrifying keyword here. I made a potentially life-changing decision. Pack a bag right now. You're staying with me until this nightmare is completely over, and we're going to beat them at their own evil game." For the next month, I documented everything obsessively like a private investigator building a case. Marcus bringing expensive gifts while secretly photographing Rose's private financial documents and personal papers when she wasn't looking. Sarah having Rose sign complex legal papers that weren't really routine updates. They were systematically giving Sarah comprehensive power of attorney in case Rose became medically incapacitated. The twins weren't just sharing war stories. They were recording them with professional equipment, probably planning to sell exclusive rights to documentary filmmakers or celebrity biographers later. I also discovered they'd been conducting their own investigations into Emma's and my personal lives, looking for ammunition they could use against us. Marcus had hired a private investigator to dig up embarrassing information about my law school failure and subsequent mental health struggles. Sarah had been interviewing Emma's former employers and college friends, looking for anyone who might say something negative about her character. Meanwhile, I kept doing exactly what I'd always done naturally, helping Rose with her complex daily medication schedule, which involved 12 different prescriptions taken at specific times throughout the day. Reading classic novels to her when her eyes were too tired for books. Her favorites were Victorian literature and mystery novels, especially anything by Agatha Christie. Listening patiently to her stories about building her business empire from absolutely nothing. Stories I'd heard dozens of times but never grew tired of hearing. Rose had an incredible memory for details, even at her age. She could recall specific conversations from 50 years ago, remember the exact prices she'd paid for properties during the Depression, and describe complex business negotiations with perfect accuracy. Her mind was still sharp despite her physical deterioration. "You know what I've learned in 86 years of life?" she asked one evening as I carefully adjusted her pillows and checked her oxygen levels. "What's that, Grandma?" "People show you exactly who they really are when serious money's involved. The ones who genuinely love you keep loving you exactly the same way. The ones who don't, well, they reveal their true evil nature." She was testing us systematically. She'd always been testing us, even before the dramatic inheritance announcement. Every conversation, every interaction, every request for help had been a small test of our character and motivations. That night, I heard careful footsteps in the hallway outside Rose's bedroom. I grabbed the aluminum baseball bat I'd started keeping by my bed and crept toward her room. The door was slightly open, and I could see a shadowy figure standing directly over her sleeping form. Marcus. He was holding a large pillow in both hands, positioned directly above her peaceful face. "What the hell are you doing?" I whispered harshly, stepping into the doorway with the bat raised threateningly. He spun around quickly, pillow still clutched in his guilty hands. She was having trouble breathing normally. I was just trying to help her get more comfortable. But Rose was sleeping peacefully, breathing normally and steadily. The medical oxygen tank was working perfectly fine, providing steady flow at the prescribed rate. "Get out right now," I said, gripping the bat tighter with white knuckles. "You're being completely paranoid," he said defensively, but he backed toward the door quickly. "This whole stressful situation is making everyone crazy and suspicious of normal behavior." After he left, I installed a hidden camera directly in Rose's bedroom. What I captured over the next week made me physically sick to my stomach. Marcus had been coming into her room every single night, not to hurt Rose physically, but to whisper poisonous lies directly in her ear while she slept. Systematic psychological warfare disguised as concerned grandson behavior. "He's only here for your money, Grandma. He told Emma he can't wait for you to die so he can inherit everything and move to California. He's been stealing cash from your purse when you're not looking. He laughs about your war stories behind your back, calls them boring old lady rambling that puts him to sleep, night after night, systematically poisoning her dreams and subconscious mind against me. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and cruel, designed to undermine my relationship with Rose while she was most vulnerable. Sarah's approach was even more medically sinister. She'd been systematically switching Rose's essential heart medications with completely harmless placebos, making her condition deteriorate much faster than natural. The pills I thought were helping stabilize her serious heart condition were just sugar tablets disguised as life-saving medicine. But what I discovered next made everything else pale in comparison. While going through Sarah's briefcase that she'd left in Rose's study, I found detailed architectural plans of the mansion, specifically highlighting structural weak points in the staircase and balcony railings. There were also printed emails between Sarah and a contractor discussing accident-prone modifications to the handrails in Rose's bathroom and bedroom. They weren't just planning to eliminate the competition. They were planning to stage Rose's death to look accidental, probably after she'd signed over power of attorney to Sarah. The emails revealed their complete plan. Sarah would gain control of Rose's assets through the power of attorney documents, then arrange for strategic accidents around the house. The inheritance competition was just a distraction, while they positioned themselves to take everything. I also discovered they'd been slowly poisoning Rose's mind against Emma and me through more than just Marcus's midnight whispers. Sarah had been forging emails and text messages, making it appear that Emma and I were constantly talking about Rose's money behind her back. She'd created an entire fake paper trail of conversations that never happened, planning to present them as evidence if Rose ever questioned their motives. The depth of their planning was absolutely staggering. They had backup plans for their backup plans. If the accident approach didn't work, they'd prepared evidence to have Rose declared mentally incompetent. If that failed, they'd arranged for Emma and me to be framed for elder abuse. They'd even researched private investigators who could be bribed to provide false testimony. But their biggest mistake was underestimating Rose herself, and underestimating how far I'd go to protect the people I loved. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering additional evidence. I broke into Marcus's apartment while he was at work and found detailed floor plans of Rose's house with marked escape routes and timing charts. He'd been planning this for months, studying Rose's daily routine down to the minute. In Sarah's home office, I discovered a disturbing collection of research about inheritance law, elder abuse cases, and successful insurance fraud schemes. She'd studied dozens of cases where family members had successfully manipulated elderly relatives. There were printed articles about families who'd staged accidents and gotten away with it. Most horrifying was a detailed psychological profile she'd written about Rose, analyzing her weaknesses and triggers. Sarah had been studying our grandmother like a predator studying prey, looking for the most effective ways to manipulate and control her. I also found evidence that they'd been drugging the twins to keep them compliant. Jake and Luke's recent erratic behavior wasn't just stress about the inheritance. Marcus and Sarah had been slipping them sedatives to keep them docile and uninvolved. The twins had no idea they were being used as pawns in a larger game. The investigation led me to discover they'd already attempted to kill Rose once before. 3 months ago, when Rose had her fall down the stairs that everyone attributed to her weakening condition, it hadn't been an accident. Marcus had loosened the stair railings and Sarah had given Rose medications that would cause dizziness and disorientation. Rose had survived because of pure luck and my quick response in calling the paramedics, but they'd learned from that failed attempt and were planning something more foolproof this time. I realized they were escalating their timeline. The inheritance competition deadline was still weeks away, but they couldn't wait. Rose was getting suspicious, asking too many questions about the legal documents Sarah kept bringing her to sign. That's when I discovered their final plan. They were going to stage a home invasion gone wrong. Marcus had already hired criminals through his underground contacts, the same people who'd broken into Emma's apartment. The plan was to make it look like burglars had killed Rose during a robbery, with Sarah conveniently being the only family member with legal access to the estate. Emma and I would be framed as the masterminds, since we were the ones living closest to Rose and had the most access to the house. They'd already planted evidence in my apartment. I found it during a search after becoming paranoid about their reach. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. Rose had been testing us from the beginning, but she'd also been testing them, and she was far more aware of their schemes than they realized. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. During what was supposed to be a routine family dinner, I walked into the dining room to find Marcus holding a knife to Emma's throat, while Sarah stood over Rose with a syringe. "You've been a problem," Sarah said calmly, as if discussing business. "Too curious, too protective. It's time to accelerate our timeline." Emma's eyes were wide with terror, and Rose looked genuinely frightened for the first time since I'd known her. "Let them go," I said, stepping into the room with my hands raised. "This is between us." "No, it's about $47 million, Marcus replied, pressing the knife closer to Emma's neck. "And you've been standing in our way." That's when I activated the live stream I'd set up on my phone. Every word, every action was being broadcast directly to the police station, where Detective Morrison was watching in real time. "You're making a mistake," I said, trying to buy time. "Rose isn't as helpless as you think." Sarah laughed bitterly. "The old woman can barely walk. What's she going to do?" That's when Rose spoke from her wheelchair, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I can do this." She pressed a hidden button on her wheelchair, and every door in the house locked automatically. Steel shutters dropped over the windows. The mansion's security system activated, trapping everyone inside. "What the hell?" Marcus screamed, loosening his grip on Emma just enough for her to break free. "I've been preparing for this for months," Rose said calmly. "Ever since I realized what you were planning. The inheritance competition was just bait to make you reveal your true intentions." Police sirens were already approaching the house. Sarah lunged at Rose with the syringe, but I tackled her before she could reach her target. The needle went flying across the room, shattering against the marble floor. Marcus tried to run, but the locked doors trapped him. He turned on me with the knife, wild with desperation. "You ruined everything!" We fought viciously, crashing into furniture and breaking priceless antiques. He was younger and stronger, but I was fighting for my family's lives. Emma grabbed a heavy candlestick and struck him from behind, just as he was about to stab me. He collapsed unconscious as the police finally breached the security system and stormed into the house. Sarah was still fighting like a cornered animal, screaming about her rights and threatening lawsuits even as they put her in handcuffs. "You can't prove anything. This is all a setup." But we had everything on video. The live stream had captured their confessions, their threats, their attempted murder. There was no denying what they'd done. As the paramedics checked on Rose and Emma, Detective Morrison pulled me aside. "We've been investigating them for weeks based on your tips," he said. "But this live confession was exactly what we needed. They're looking at life sentences." The twins, who'd been found drugged and unconscious in the garden shed, were taken to the hospital. They'd been completely unaware of the violence, sedated to keep them out of the way during the final confrontation. Rose, despite everything she'd been through, insisted on making her final will changes that very night. With Mr. Peterson and the police as witnesses, she signed the documents that would secure Emma's and my future. I want this finished tonight, she said firmly. I won't give them any chance to challenge this from prison. The next few months were a blur of trials, media attention, and legal proceedings. Marcus and Sarah both received life sentences without the possibility of parole. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The recordings, the forged documents, the attempted murders, everything. The twins, once they recovered from the drugs, were horrified to learn what had almost happened. They'd been unknowing pawns in a game that could have killed their entire family. Jake immediately entered rehab, and Luke started therapy to deal with the trauma of discovering how close they'd come to being accessories to murder. 6 months after the trial ended, Rose passed peacefully in her sleep. Emma and I were by her side, holding her hands as she slipped away naturally, surrounded by love instead of the violence Marcus and Sarah had planned. Her final words were simple: "You showed up when it mattered most." The reading of the will was a formality at this point. Emma received $30 million and immediately enrolled in medical school to specialize in geriatric care. The twins each received $2 million, enough to rebuild their lives if they made better choices. I inherited the remaining $15 million, along with the mansion and all of Rose's business holdings. But more importantly, I inherited the knowledge that I'd protected the people who mattered most when they needed it. Emma and I used a large portion of our inheritance to start the Rose Foundation, dedicated to protecting elderly people from financial abuse and family manipulation. We also funded a legal clinic that helps families navigate inheritance disputes without resorting to violence. The foundation has helped hundreds of elderly people protect themselves from predatory family members and financial scammers. We've trained social workers to recognize signs of elder abuse, funded legal aid for seniors who can't afford attorneys, and created safe housing for elderly people who need to escape dangerous family situations. Marcus died in prison 3 years later, killed by another inmate who didn't appreciate people who hurt elderly relatives. Sarah is still serving her sentence, working in the prison laundry and writing letters to legal aid organizations claiming her innocence. The twins have both rebuilt their lives successfully. Jake is 5 years sober and works as a counselor for addiction recovery. Luke finished college and became a social worker, specializing in family crisis intervention. They visit Emma and me occasionally, grateful that we saved them from becoming accessories to murder. Sometimes I drive past the old Victorian mansion, now converted into a senior living facility through our foundation. Elderly residents sit on the wraparound porch, playing cards and sharing stories, protected by security systems and careful staff screening that prevent the kind of abuse Rose almost suffered. Emma visits the facility weekly as part of her medical practice, treating residents who remind her of our grandmother. She's married now, to a fellow doctor who treats her like the treasure she is. They're expecting their first child next spring, a little girl they plan to name Rose. And me? I learned that inheritance isn't just about money. It's about values, character, and the choices you make when faced with impossible situations. Rose left me more than just millions. She left me the knowledge that when it mattered most, when evil was wearing the mask of family and love was being weaponized for greed, I chose to protect instead of profit. The real inheritance wasn't the money, it was the lesson that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. I had shown up when it mattered most, and that made all the difference in the world.